Welcome back to the Solid Verbal Boys and Girls. My name, as always, is Ty Hildenbrandt, that fine gentleman over there in the heart of the Midwest, really the heart and soul of the Solid Verbal podcast. The one, the only, still the incomparable Dan Rubenstein, sir. Welcome back.
Thank
How goes
you.
it, my friend?
Glad to be back. Can I ask you a personal question?
Always.
This pertains to the spirit of today's show, the concept of today's show. I know we're going to get into news here in a second, but I want to set the stage. How are you on a high dive?
On a high dive?
Yeah.
How high of a dive?
So you have your standard rec pool level high dive, or if you've ever been in like a college, pool area, like the indoor pool where there's the diving team where they've got the 5, 7.5, and I have no idea what heights exist in college.
We're just making up meters.
I know there's a 10-meter high dive, platform dive in the Olympics. I have no idea if that's a college level platform height, but I don't know if you've jumped off a platform. I don't know if you've jumped off of like high rocks somewhere tropical, or just the high dive at a pool. How are you on those placements?
Generally not great.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm hesitant on the strategy when jumping from that height going into the water.
Well, what's your strategy?
My strategy is to go either cannonball or pencil.
Well, it's no injuries, and it's don't look like an idiot. Don't end up on somebody's TikTok or Instagram or YouTube fails comp, right?
That's correct.
That's really base level. You're just like, okay, if I do that, if I can avoid that, that's a success.
Then you're fine. Exactly.
I feel as if right now we are entering the point of the year where everybody's kind of staring down the platform or the high dive, looking at the ladder and saying, okay, it's time once again to face our fears or to thrive, whatever it is. Hey, sorry for the quick interruption, but it'd be incredible if you considered subscribing to the Solid Verbal YouTube channel right down below. But we got to start climbing that ladder, Ty. Whether it's spring football, whether it's off-season conditioning, whether it's summer workouts, whether it's fall camp, what we're doing is we're staring at that ladder. You're climbing. And then the season begins and you're on that platform. You're on that high dive. And everybody's goals are different. There are some people who say, no injuries. Some people who say, don't look like an ass. Some people who say, don't flop on my back, don't flop on my stomach. Some people who say, I'm just looking at clean dive, right? Clean dive, enter the water. Some people are saying, I'm going to do this twist, I'm going to do this flip, I'm going to do this entrance, whatever. Highly technical diving terms.
Yeah.
And what we're here to do today in our Prove It episode is we are going to say, this is what we're looking for from your dive, from your jump, okay? And if you can avoid that moment, look, and to tie it together, Mark Richt, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely sterling, precise on that high platform, right? Just does that lean back into backflip, enters cleanly. What a joy it was to watch him in fall camp enter the pool from that high platform. If you can avoid this from the booth.
Oh, what happened there? That was total disaster. What is happening?
If you can avoid that. So what we're saying is, what are our goals for this offseason into the season? We're going to go through a number of teams and say, this is what I'm looking for. Oregon, Nebraska, Pitt, Miami, Florida State. This is what you need to prove to me. And this is the high dive analogy that I kept coming back to.
You need to prove to me that this construction is not going to be for naught.
No, absolutely.
You need to prove to me that preamble is going to make this show content worth it. That was quite a setup, Dan Rubenstein.
Yes, of course. So that's what today's show is what do a number of high, medium, perhaps low-profile schools have to prove to us? Ty, starting second baseman, varsity baseball?
That's correct.
Dan Rubenstein, you can look this up. Los Angeles Daily News, all San Fernando Valley. Honorable mention tennis. That's who we are, that you need to prove it to us. Okay,
all right.
That's it.
Well, with all that being said, we're going to get to prove it. We're also going to go through a little bit of news here. Thank you for stopping on back to the Solid Verbal. Hit subscribe or follow wherever it is you get your podcasts. Of course, going out to verballers.com to check out some of our bonus offerings here. That's the Patreon, where you can go to further support the show, get bonus episodes, ad-free episodes, access to the Discord, and all the other little perks we've got brewing here in the college football offseason. Without further ado, Dan. got a few news bullets that I think we need to dive into.
Okay.
I believe, and this is really, I think, a pretty good indication for where we're at in the college football offseason. The fact that Arch Manning opting out of college football 25 as our lead story tells you pretty much everything you need to know about early March. I did not think we would get to this point in the offseason. There has been so much news flowing. Like we're Neo in the Matrix, man, dodging the bullets with all this news coming at us.
Timely reference. Continue.
And finally, thank you. We've arrived at the point where we could talk about players opting out and that being a thing. So for context, college football 25, going to be a thing, presumably at some point later this summer in July. EA Sports provided the numbers a few days ago now that they've had over 10,000 college football players opt into the game. That represents about 87% of what their goal is. So by any stretch of the imagination here, I think it's been pretty successful in the early going. They still have about a month to get their names in the game if they have yet to do so.
Yeah.
One name that will not be in the game is Arch Manning. Some interesting commentary around this decision. Anwar Richardson from orangebloods.com was one who broke the news. Quote, multiple people have told me Texas redshirt quarterback Arch Manning will not opt into the EA Sports College Football 25 game. I'm told Arch is focused on playing football on the field. Okay, playing football on the field.
Too locked in, baby. Too locked in to sign an Adobe Acrobat piece of digital document and collect your $600 for doing literally nothing. Okay?
Yeah, it's there's been some commentary on this, and what's Arch Manning, 19 years old?
Yeah, do what you want. Follow your heart. That's okay.
It's his prerogative to do whatever he wants. I did want to react to this, though. I saw this take from Shahan Jayaraja on CBS Sports.
Okay.
Posted it out on Twitter. And I like and respect Shahan's work. I think he does a great job. I just fully disagree with this take. He says,
okay.
honestly,
first of all, can I appreciate something?
Yeah.
Naming names. I like that. Great job.
He says, quote, I honestly get this. There's no upside for him. The finances have nothing to do with it. Every little thing about this would be a sideshow. From his rating to people posting about benching Quinn or transferring in the game. Why not neutralize it until you're a real player in 2025? Okay. So that was his take. Again, I respect where he's coming from. I just fully disagree with the take because for one, that the argument that the game is a distraction, could that not be made for literally every other college football player, whether you're in the game or not?
Yeah.
Even for the projected starters, you could argue it's a bigger distraction for those guys. So unless you're extremely online,
yeah,
or unless you're hanging out in the deep, dark corners of Twitch,
yeah,
these two worlds don't really intersect. There's not a whole lot of overlap on that Venn diagram. I actually think it creates more of a distraction by not joining. So that's the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing that I take issue with is the idea that it's not about finances. That's only partially true. Arch Manning does not need $600. Agreed? We would agree on that, yeah?
From what I can tell, yes, he does not. You are correct.
I think he's all right here.
Yeah.
Arch Manning does not need $600. Where I disagree, though, is that this is clearly Arch's people angling for that preferred player treatment that we know is out there. I think Tyler Shuck, I don't have the full list of guys in front of me, but I know Tyler Shuck got the preferred player, quote unquote, treatment. He did, where they get more than just the $600 that's been reported. They're also serving in some capacity as like an ambassador for the game, right? Clearly, this is Arch making it known that he's willing to hold out to get a better deal at some point down the line. Maybe this season.
Good.
Who knows? If Quinn Ewers or something happens to Quinn and Arch gets thrust into that starting role, perhaps perhaps this is Arch's way of saying that he's willing to talk. But for now, it just seems like maybe he's putting it out there that he's willing to hold out and he's looking for a little bit more to get in the game. So again, like you said, okay, that's fine. I also disagree with there being an upside downside situation here, right? As mentioned in the tweet, there's no upside. The upside is the public perception. The public perception right now is that Arch thinks he's too good for the game or is looking for more money.
Okay.
So the upside would be not having to deal with that and the distractions that come with that, as opposed to, whatever else we could conjure up here. So I think he should have taken it. I think he should just be in the game, be part of the celebration. But I am a lowly podcaster, and I am certainly not a money man. I'm not in charge of these negotiations, but I don't know. Kind of stinks to me.
I'm not gonna overthink what the backup quarterback for a major place is thinking. Look, the first letter in NIL is name. He has the most famous last name in the sport, and if he feels, or somebody representing him or in his ear feels like he's worth more money, great. Secure the bag. Do what you got to do.
Whatever, man. Hey,
it's
whatever.
Not going to affect sales of the game either way. It's not going to be a distraction either way. It's all good.
It's all good. All right. Again, early March. Appreciate everybody's take. I just have a little bit of a different one. The other thing that we should mention here, really interesting article dropped on ESPN.com earlier today. Actually, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. Chris Lowe from ESPN.com put together the quote, how Alabama moved from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer in 49 hours article. A lot of juicy stuff in here. The most notable of which was that Nick Saban alerted the powers that be at Alabama at the end of the 22 season that this was something that was on his radar, i.e. retirement was on his radar. Also, there was a fair amount of discussion in the piece about the Alabama search centering on Kalen DeBoer and Mike Norvell at Florida State, and that if Norvell had left Florida State for Alabama, Lane Kiffin would be the primary target for Florida State, which I think would have been a tremendous fit if and when. There was that. There was a lot in here, frankly, about how Nick Saban worked until the final gun, which should probably surprise nobody.
Right.
But also how sort of conflicted he was, even in the moment, even though he knew it was time, and even though he felt like the game was catching up with him to a certain degree. Look, he's been at this his entire adult life. He was really torn on whether or not it was the right time, even though he felt it into his marrow. So I thought Chris Lowe did a really good job kind of detailing this. We tend to get these articles whenever there's like big momentous breaking news. It's only a matter
the autopsy,
a matter of when, not if, we're going to read it, and whether it's in The Athletic or ESPN or CBS or elsewhere. And would encourage everybody, we'll put a link here in the show notes to the article, but would encourage everyone who listens to this show to go out there and read it and form your own opinions and, learn a little bit more about that process.
Yeah, there were a couple of quotes and not tendencies, but a couple of quotes and moments that caught my eye. One of which was Greg Byrne, the Alabama offensive coordinator, Alabama athletic director. What did I say? I just threw together a bunch of words that had nothing to do with anything.
If Greg Byrne is calling plays for Kalen DeBoer, that would be a left turn.
Greg Byrne, Alabama athletic director, said he had his people look up the most successful college football hires the past 25 years, and it came back as promoted coordinators from elsewhere, other Power 5 coordinators, sitting G5 head coaches, and I think he said, and maybe I'm missing examples of this, it was NFL coordinators brought to college.
Yeah, 75% were group of 5 coaches or promotions, that type of thing.
Coordinators or internal hires. I off the top of my head couldn't think of NFL coordinators who came in and were immediately successful college head coaches, but maybe I'm forgetting somebody. And then he went the other direction. He went with an existing Power 5 head coach. It was very important to him, in his words, to get existing major program head coach experience, which isn't necessarily something that fits the trend of guys who have succeeded at major places, that they're not immediately coming from other major college places. Of course, Nick Saban coming from college or coming from the pros as a head coach doesn't fit that either. But Nick Saban's sort of one of one in this universe. The other thing was that it seemed to go to a certain distance with Mike Norvell before he signed his extension, and certainly has things in a great place at Florida State, it seems, at least in the medium term with where Florida State is as a program. And also the timeline of Kalen DeBoer saying, he was texting his players on the flight home to Seattle from the national championship game. They were locking in, but also he turned down 2 extensions, one of which was during the season. These are all known things. Turned down an extension for, $9 and change million during the season, and then another attempt from the University of Washington at $9.6 million, I think is what it peaked at, the ceiling of an offer from Washington, to have that opportunity at Alabama, and I get taking that opportunity. And I thought his quote was interesting, and we talked about this a little bit when we talked about like, oh, you don't want to be the guy that follows the guy. And Greg Byrne, that was an actual question that he asked. Like, how do you feel about that sort of narrative that you don't want to be, quote, the guy who follows the guy, but rather the guy after that guy? And Kalen DeBoer, at least to me, said the right thing. And it was like that. There's only one guy who ever gets that opportunity. And so he sort of embraced the unique nature of that challenge, that nobody has had to follow the best coach of all time, the current best coach of all time, until him. And so there's the unique challenge aspect of that. But also just kind of got the vibes of like, kind of done in Seattle. It wasn't the most difficult thing to accept this absolute challenge in Tuscaloosa. Maybe it was a roster thing. Maybe it was the fact that his AD left for USC, the one that hired him, Jen Cohen. But for whatever reason, it seemed like an especially seamless decision for Kalen DeBoer. At least that was my take from this
It's
article.
Alabama.
It's Alabama.
It's Alabama. And despite the fact that a lot has left since Saban left, there's still a lot in place. And there are still a lot of built-in advantages to taking over that program. I hope that goes without saying. So I understand why he would take the job. I understand, I get all of it, but I was eagerly waiting for somebody to write this piece too.
Oh, well, it was always going to be Chris Lowe. It was always going to be Chris Lowe. And I thought it was also especially interesting that Nick Saban, the quote was something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, that was like, I didn't leave because of what he perceived to be player apathy towards the greater cause at Alabama, right? Being developed into the best player, student, person, whatever at Alabama, that he had all these exit interviews after the season with players, and that they were all saying like, well, what does my playing time look like for next year? And what does my bottom line look like moving forward financially? And Saban was like, it's not the reason, but it wasn't not a reason that he like kind of was like, I'm done with this. I'm just absolutely done with these types of conversations.
It does fit the trend that we've been hearing from others around the sport.
But he's also 72.
72 years old.
Look, you talk about Nick Saban thinking about his retirement a year in advance. I'm thinking about my retirement every other hour right now, Ty.
Nick Saban not going to be part of college football in 2024, at least not as a coach. He will be a College Game Day. We'll see a lot more of him. We're going to try to get him on the show at some point. We'll see if we can work that out. The final news nuggie here before we get to our Prove It segment of the episode. Neil Brown.
Oh,
Neil Brown got extended, man.
Yeah.
Speaking of securing the bag, speaking of challenges, Neil Brown came into the 23 season very much on the hot seat. I had him dead to rights even before the season kicked off. Neil Brown went to a bowl game, had the Duke's Mayo, the big vat of it dumped over him, and has now been extended through 2027. An interesting nugget here from the actual report, though, that stemmed from this announcement. Neil Brown earned about $4 million in 2023. He'd been set to earn $4.1 million in 2024, according to the previous contract. Actually, his salary will slightly decrease in the new deal. He'll earn about $4 million in 24 and 25, and then 4.3 in 2026, sources told ESPN. He elected to forego increases to his own salary so West Virginia could invest more in his coaching staff, a major priority for both him and the school.
Yeah, I'm curious to see the money behind the scenes for collectives, NIL type stuff, because that's something we talked about that when we did our West Virginia show last year. Like, where is the commitment? As West Virginia has lost some key dudes to, big offers elsewhere, is 2023 enough proof, enough evidence that like, okay, we're putting more money into this program. We're extending Neil Brown. So it appears we have more stability in a Big 12. That how many Big 12 programs right now are saying to themselves, why not us as like the new power, the new anchor of the conference? Why not West Virginia? And so I could see that line of thinking. Hopefully there's some more money behind the scenes to keep that program a little bit more stable, because an encouraging 2023 nevertheless.
An encouraging 2023, and like the big deal with Neil Brown going into last season was, again, fans online saying, how often do we got to hear this line about changes are needed, changes are needed, changes are needed? Finally, he found some changes that worked. and it was to great effect. Now the guy's got an extension. I think he earned it with the job he did last season. Back against the wall, West Virginia had a good year. We just did the top 10 quarterbacks episode on Tuesday, and we talked a little bit about Garrett Green. Garrett Green came into his own. The running game was very much the focal point of that offense. A lot to be excited about, hopefully, moving forward under Neil Brown. We knew he was a good coach before he got there.
Right.
Maybe it just took a minute for him to show it off in Morgantown.
Yeah. Also, they lost to 40. Lost to Oklahoma by 40, excuse me.
Lost to Oklahoma by 40, yeah.
So it was a good year to win games against flawed and injured teams, and it won't always be the case for West Virginia, but hopefully they continue to grow, and he continues to what, Ty? Prove it?
Oh, yeah.
Prove it.
Prove it.
Prove it, Dad. Prove it.
Prove it. Does sound like a Nickelodeon game show from 1996 hosted by J.D. Roth. If you remember J.D. Roth. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Prove It. Okay. So what we're doing is we are somehow further inflating our own egos and saying, Ty, did you win any sort of, were you like an all-region second baseman, an all-league second baseman?
No.
You were just doing the dirty work behind the scenes, right?
I was doing the dirty work behind the scenes. Yeah, it was a yeoman effort, yeoman-like effort from me out there. Definitely more of a defensive specialist than a home run hitter. I know people would be shocked to hear that, seeing my chiseled physique in person, but alas, no, I was much more of a defensive specialist in my day.
There's a little bit of a Shania undercurrent, right? Like, oh yeah, Colorado, you increased your TV ratings and money behind the scenes. That don't impress me much. So there is some of that. I have this.
Prove it.
Prove it.
Yeah.
You want me to prove it?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a list of teams.
What does Oregon need to prove
Good question.
this year? We've got a whole list of teams here spanning, I don't know, every corner of the country. Is like 16 teams in this list.
Yeah.
But let's start with our own, because those are the ones I think that we know the best. Oregon, what does Oregon need to prove to you, Dan?
So Oregon, on a sort of micro level, they need to do better against killer quarterbacks, right? They were beat up at corner last year. They, didn't get to Michael Penix in that Pac-12 championship game. And really the idea is they're just a big game team, or big game lacking team in this moment. And last year it was those two Washington games. The year before it was Washington and Oregon State, where they blew the rivalry game. To me, it's still going to be defense. I don't think Dylan Gabriel has much to prove as a college football quarterback. I don't think talent level there's anything to prove. Oregon's in a really nice place. I really think it's Dan Lanning in those big high leverage moments. We saw it against Washington on those fourth downs in the red zone, up against the clock at halftime. And we saw how they came out last year in the Pac-12 championship game, where it seemed like Washington was just better prepared. They had a better concept of what Oregon was doing on offense, it seemed. The Washington defense did. They were ready for that moment. And so to me, what Oregon needs to prove is moment readiness. And you can say that like they're almost weirdly in a Penn State spot where on the face, it looks like a 2-game schedule this year with Michigan and Ohio State. All due respect to the rest of Oregon's schedule. Washington looks to be just a fully different program this year. We'll see what Boise State looks like. But in terms of the quarterbacks they'll face and the teams and talent level that are on the rosters that they'll face, they are a moment readiness program at this time. And so it's Michigan on the road, Ohio State, and Eugene. That's what Dan Lanning, that's what Oregon, because I think they're going to have dudes on both sides of the ball. I think they're going to have all Big Ten type talent, NFL type talent developing and continue to develop. It's, what do they look like, when it's 17-13, 3 minutes before halftime, down 4 against Ohio State? It's moment readiness, and I demand, Ty, as an Oregon human, I demand to see that Oregon come out of these games, even in a losing effort, that like it wasn't an unprepared to execute. It was just that team had a killer here, and there was nothing any team in the country could have done about it. And I don't necessarily put Will Howard in that category. I don't put Alex Orji or whoever ends up starting at Michigan in that category. Oregon has every opportunity to prove it this year, and that's that last missing thing for them.
Yeah. I understand that this is not a like-for-like comparison.
Right.
Full disclosure.
Sure.
Oregon needs to prove that it's not Texas A&M Northwest.
Ooh. Okay.
And what I mean by that, A&M's been winning, 7-8 games a year. Oregon's clearly been better than that.
Right.
But just from a recruiting angle, from that side of things, and how, as we know, recruiting shapes expectations.
Yeah.
Dan Lanning has kicked up so much dust on the high school, on the transfer portal recruiting fronts. At a minimum, expectation is what? Big Ten title hunt, making the playoffs, certainly making the playoffs, probably winning a playoff game or two.
I think if they're not in Indy, the season's a failure. Yeah.
Dan Lanning needs to prove that Oregon is not simply the latest hype train with big-time recruits, because we've seen programs like that come and go. That would not be a new occurrence in college football. I don't think Oregon is that team. I think Oregon is very much built for the long haul. I love Dan Lanning. There's a reason everybody wants to hire Dan Lanning.
So you just concocted an analogy that you don't believe in.
I'm saying, though, they need to prove that.
Okay, fair enough.
They need to prove as much.
Okay.
They need to prove. Dan Lanning needs to prove that he is the dude, that he can take those big-name recruits and translate them into wins. Not just double-digit wins and not beating Liberty in a Fiesta Bowl. But let's talk about a playoff. Let's talk about what that looks like.
In this case, it's sticking the landing off of the 10-meter platform.
It would be sticking the landing,
It's the flips, it's the twists, and it's entering the water seamlessly with only a few droplets.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I felt a little wrong making that comparison to A&M.
Yeah,
so
I don't know who it is. Because Oregon has that reputation and has had that reputation with others, right? That they're like, okay, they're a West Coast power. But that next step isn't there. Even though, they've won Rose Bowls, they won the Fiesta, they won at least a Fiesta Bowl. I think they won this year, and Kansas State way back. That they're a next step team. They're not just a regional diving power. They're Olympian hopefuls.
This diving analogy is so clunky, but yet it is sticky.
It works. I can see the sort of sparkle in your eyes.
All right, where do you want to go next?
Let's go Notre Dame. Let's be selfish with this. What does Notre Dame need to prove to you? Not the college football universe. Not the universe with where Notre Dame is, how they're built. What do they need to prove, especially when you look at their 2024 schedule?
I'm going to focus this solely on Marcus Freeman.
Yeah.
And Marcus Freeman, I think, has a lot to prove still. But I think the thing that I think of most is that he needs to prove that he can field a playoff caliber offense this year.
Yeah.
This is now the second straight year where he's gone out and gotten one of the best portal quarterbacks. Last year, Sam Hartman. This year, obviously Riley Leonard from Duke, two ACC guys. Last year just wasn't it, man. It wasn't it. The offensive line was out of sync. The passing game never fully clicked, either because of what Jared Parker was calling or because of the line or because they just didn't have the receivers. I'll wait for somebody to write that postmortem. But the passing game didn't click. The offense ended up being extremely predictable and focused mostly on what they could do on the ground, whether it was Audric Estime or any of the other younger backs that they've got, or Sam Hartman running for it on third or fourth and whatever. This Mike Denbrock hire needs to work.
$2 million a year, baby.
It needs to work for Notre Dame. It needs to work for Marcus Freeman. I give Marcus Freeman credit for cutting bait. I guess it was Jared Parker taking the Troy job. I find it hard to believe that Notre Dame didn't help that narrative along a little bit to get him out of Dodge, the old Charlie Molnar treatment.
Right.
I give Marcus Freeman some credit for recognizing there was a deficiency going out there and hiring a guy that was not successful the last time he was in Notre Dame, at least did not exit on great terms after a 4-8 season, but was obviously very successful and proved to some degree that he learned from past experiences and, built LSU into a pretty good offense this past season, helped turn Jaden Daniels into a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. So I give him credit for kind of recognizing where things were, understanding the lay of the land, going out there and getting an offensive coordinator who I think is compatible with the talent on hand. But he needs to prove it. Again, he needs to prove that he can put the offense out there and have it do more than it's done the last two seasons. Because if he doesn't, we're kind of right back in square one. We're looking at a team that's, I think, going to have a pretty good defense and will have plenty of talent up and down the roster, but will remain one of those schools that we look at and say, well, they're good, but they're not great.
Can I interject my own prove it to me? Honorable mention, doubles, San Fernando Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Riley Leonard, that's his name, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Riley Leonard, as they screw up quarterback names all off season long. I want Mike Denbrock to prove to me that Riley Leonard is Heisman-ish. Because, unless I'm reading this schedule incorrectly, does Notre Dame play a true road game between September 14th and the final game of the year? Do they? I know they open up at Texas A&M.
It's advantageous.
No, an actual true road game between mid-September and USC and LA to finish the year. Pull up the schedule.
Yeah.
It's like Navy in New Jersey. And I think they have Georgia Tech. It's in Atlanta, but it's not at Bobby Dodd. It's not in Georgia Tech's home stadium.
That's right.
So it sets up, like, if I were to tell you just like, hey, I just came back from the future, Notre Dame is legit good. They should win 11 games. Florida State's in South Bend.
Yeah, they've got the game on the road at Kyle Field week 1.
Yeah.
They've got a road trip to Purdue week 3. But otherwise, yeah, sort of quasi-neutral site game on the road at Georgia Tech, middle of October. The Navy game in New Jersey. Army in the Bronx at USC to close out the season.
They don't play a true road game. And there's an asterisk to Georgia Tech's in Atlanta, but still.
Yeah.
They're not in an opposing college stadium between September 14th and November whatever, right? For USC?
Right.
I think Mike Denbrock legitimately needs to prove to me that Riley Leonard can be a Heisman-ish. I'm not talking about New York. I'm just saying, like, hey, it's Halloween. Here's like the Stu Mandel or whoever, Danny Cannell. I don't know why that name came up. Straw poll, right?
Right.
Like,
right.
I just want Riley Leonard in that conversation. If they're paying Mike Denbrock the money they're paying him, and that schedule looks like it looks, Florida State with a number of new pieces on both sides of the ball, show me. That's all I'm saying.
All right.
Where do you want to go next?
What does Colorado need to prove to you? To us? To itself?
So, Colorado goes 4-8 last year.
Mm-hmm.
They've got the close win against ASU, the close win against Colorado State, close win against TCU, and comfortable win against Nebraska. That was probably the high point of the season.
Right.
I want 2-3 double-digit wins from Colorado this year. I want them to look more capable for 4 straight quarters. I want them to go to a team on the road, at home. It doesn't matter to me. Like, Colorado's clearly better than this team, and they won 33-20. I want more of that from Colorado. I want you to prove that Shedeur Sanders can stay upright for a season, that he is not just going to be wave after wave of pass rush, because that offensive line was a nightmare last year. You need to prove that along the line of scrimmage. New position coaches, coordinators, everything has changed behind the scenes at Colorado over the course of yet another offseason. They have to look the part. Like, it's one thing that, to have the number 1 transfer portal rankings just in terms of pure numbers. Like, who's actually in those uniforms? They might look the part getting off the bus, but on the field, even in what should be an easier conference for Colorado, schedule starts real quick.
It starts, well, here's the thing about Colorado.
Yeah.
Okay. Colorado's got to make a bowl.
Yeah.
They've got to make a bowl, and they need to, more importantly, show something of an upward trajectory.
Yeah.
Something that fuels more high school and portal recruiting. Because what's going to happen after 2024 is both Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter are gone. They're going to the NFL.
Yeah.
Right now, those are the 2 guys that I think are the biggest catalysts for this team. They're the engine. Dion needs more guys like that, and he needs them quickly. And so for as polarizing as I think the approach has been, and certainly for as cynical as most of college football media tended to be as this was going down in the early part of last season, in September, when Colorado was all the rage, I think we need more of the Coach Prime factor. We need more of the making Boulder feel like it's the most important place on earth, much the way like Pete Carroll did back in the day with making USC feel star-studded, right?
Yeah.
It helped
as
that
they
it was
won actual games, to
as
be
they
clear.
won actual games.
Yeah.
And of course it helped that they were in LA to begin with,
Yeah.
right? But I think we need more of that from Coach Prime on top of some actual on-field results to continue stoking the fire, building up that engine to hopefully turn this into something that is more than just one and dones every year.
Right.
They need to build something that is sustainable in Boulder. And
Yeah.
so how do you start that? Obviously, he's got the charisma. Obviously, he's been able to turn that into much more of a story than anybody saw coming. Now it needs on-field results.
Yeah.
Now it needs wins. I think it needs a bowl game. You're right when you talk about the schedule. I mean, we could go into that at the right point in time, but I think just broadly speaking, just show upward trajectory, show forward momentum so that you have something to build on after those guys walk out.
I think it's sort of proving that they can do the really boring things, right? The exciting things are there. Some of the recruiting wins are there, right? They get a big splash with a big offensive lineman committing on TV. Jordan Seaton, I think, the 5-star from IMG. And they out-recruit, Oregon and Tennessee and Maryland, and they land that guy, the splash, Travis Hunter, 2 ways, Shedeur Sanders and the Sanders brothers and Dion and TV. Like, they're doing the exciting things. They're getting on Fox. They're having the Fox pregame show on campus. You know what the boring stuff is? Converting 3rd and 3. The boring stuff, building up depth in your linebacking core. The boring stuff, keeping a coaching staff together for 2 years. The boring stuff, not choking away a game that should be winnable when you're up 29-0 at halftime. The boring stuff is what I think is the difference that doesn't exist in Colorado right now. That's what they need to prove, that they're capable of the boring.
If we're talking about choking away games, that's a perfect segue to talk about the Miami Hurricanes and Mario Cristobal, Dan Rubenstein.
Yeah.
I came up with this question when I was going through and trying to form an opinion on Miami and what it needs to prove this year. You would know the answer to this better than me. Has Mario Cristobal ever had a quarterback that he made better?
Personally, has he ever had a quarterback that has gotten better?
Has he ever coached a quarterback?
Yeah.
That at the end of that quarterback's run, you said, wow, that quarterback improved under Mario's watch?
No, but I think, to be fair to Mario and the teams he coached, like, there's a lot out of his hands and there's a lot in his hands, right? He's the one responsible for coordinators. He's the one responsible for high leverage moments, 4th downs, red zone stuff, and, general vision for an offense as a head coach. And so Justin Herbert had incredible moments with Mario Cristobal. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Didn't necessarily get better, but in dealing with the situation where Willie Taggart leaves after a year, where Mark Helfrich, who recruited him, gets fired after a year with him after his freshman year, that it was just progress was never going to be exactly linear for Justin Herbert. TVD showed some tendencies that were less than stellar and was coming off, injury, I believe, when Mario Cristobal took over. He got hurt pretty early on. That's not on Mario Cristobal that I know of.
He's been nicked up the last couple years.
And so dealing with backup quarterbacks, dealing with guys in and out of lineups, dealing with, a lot of transfers out, a lot of transfers in. Like, I wouldn't characterize the last 3-4 years of Mario Cristobal's head coaching tenure, both at Miami and Oregon, with the term stability necessarily.
No. So I guess where I'm going with this is, if we're talking about what programs, in this case, what a coach needs to prove.
Yeah.
Is this not the moment for Mario Cristobal to prove that he can get the most out of a quarterback?
Yes,
because
it is.
Cam Ward's an NFL prospect. The only reason he didn't leave is probably because he wouldn't have been drafted high enough to justify it. But he very much has designs on going to the NFL in the 2025 draft. Mario needs to prove that he's not going to screw up Cam Ward first and foremost. And I think he needs to prove that he can make him better. He needs to prove that Miami can be a destination for players of that ilk who want to come and want to play at the next level, because that has really been sort of an Achilles heel the first 2 seasons for the Miami Hurricanes. I think we saw improvement last year. I'm not going to dunk on what he's trying to build down there. I think it did get better, but it still was average. And certainly the quarterback position remains a giant open question in Coral Gables. They need to get better at that position. Cam Ward gives them an opportunity to do so. It's an open question to me as to whether or not Mario Cristobal and the staff in place can get the most out of Cam Ward.
So growing offensive line, young, growing team in terms of age, right? Things have been young and inexperienced on that roster these past couple years. I just think for Miami right now, it's the end of like the excuse period. We're talking about
I agree
3 portal classes, 3 high school classes, although obviously the first one was a last second class. And so we're talking about Mario players being upperclassmen-ish. And so to me, it's just going to be like a culture vision day-to-day thing. Like no games off, no quarters off, no halves off, no series is off, no high leverage moment. What the hell are you doing at the end of this game off?
No.
And so for some of the forward steps Miami took last year, and they returned, 1,000-yard receiver in Xavier Restrepo, like there are pieces there. The running game was fine last year. It wasn't dominant, but you could see progress. They lose key players on defense, whatever. Prove it is just every week, everybody's on the same page. The coaching staff is on the same page. You're not making dumb mistakes, and the vision is there, and the vision is not, wandered away from. And it's prove that you are capable of leading a winning program. They can go 9-3 and absolutely prove it. But at this point, like, it's the same thing with Deion Sanders. Like, a big win for Miami is us just not talking about Mario Cristobal. A big win for us with Colorado is just like, oh man, look at this guy who stepped up on defense. Look at this receiver who's like an absolute killer for Colorado. Like, the less we talk about Deion Sanders, the less we talk about Mario Cristobal, the better for both of these places.
I feel like Mario has built up a pretty good base of talent. It has improved since he got there.
Sure, of course.
That is one of the selling points for hiring this guy to begin with.
Yeah.
He is a dogged recruiter.
Bain on the defensive line, yeah.
He is a very, very talented recruiter. He's always been. So talent acquisition is not so much the issue. Assembling those pieces, getting the most out of those pieces is where we're at. I agree. It is the end of the excuse era if you're a Miami football fan and you want to see some results and not lose to Rutgers in a bowl game, presumably.
Can we stay in the ACC?
Sure.
Can we talk about your Pitt Panthers?
My Pitt Panthers.
I know you've got a secret soft spot, Ty. Don't deny it. Don't deny it. Okay.
Yes, I do have a secret soft spot for Pitt Panthers. I love the baby blues.
So
I can't get enough of the baby blues.
So my prove it for Pitt is just, it's probably a neon sign in Vegas that reads dudes, dudes, dudes. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
I looked at, and look, Pitt's 2023 was an absolute nightmare. It was a disaster from offensive coordinator. Offensive line was one of the worst in America, which is very strange to say about Pitt. Phil Jurkovec was a disaster. Everything just did not work out for Pitt. The thing that surprised me is I figured Pitt was in a place roster-wise because of how often they tended to put defensive backs in the NFL via the draft, how often they seem to develop good offensive linemen, good running backs. You go back to the season and like, that was 2017, 2018, the Kadri Allison, Darren Hall, like names that we love. Guys talking dudes.
Some deep cuts.
Do you know how many all ACC players they had last year? Like first, second, third team? They had one. Like there wasn't a straggling left guard who happened to be awesome, but they couldn't work around him. I think it was just MJ Devonshire, who was either a second or third round all ACC corner. Who's no longer there, by the way.
Not there anymore, right?
And so it's just like, for so long, Pitt, and maybe this is a result of like the portal era, whatever, but for so long, Pitt had such a great eye of finding guys, finding offensive linemen in particular. Up front, they were very good, right? Dudes. Defensive linemen, game-changing NFL caliber guys for Pitt. They didn't exist last year for Pitt. And so they hire a new offensive coordinator, Cade Bell from Western Carolina, I believe. It's now Nate Yarnell's team, who showed some promise at the end of last year. So the changes are there. There seems to be a fresh start situation. But like the prove it to me with Pitt is their schedule kind of rules. You can pull it up as I'm talking, but like...
I've got it. I've got it here.
Does their schedule full on Rhule? I think it does, if my memory serves.
It's extremely workable in September and October.
Yeah.
It gets real in
That's
November.
right. Yes.
They've got back-to-back games, home against Clemson, on the road at Louisville, back-to-back weeks. But
great.
If Pitt can get back to building, let's just focus on one of the two lines.
Yeah.
If Pitt can get back to building a very good, solid, Pat Narduzzi style defensive line, it's 7-5, 8-4.
Sure.
With this schedule, it's 7-5 or 8-4.
Yeah.
I think Pat Narduzzi needs to prove that the bone of contention he seemingly has with the state of college football, right, with the portal and
it can't carry over to
NIL.
the locker room. Yeah.
He needs to prove that is not a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Because if Pitt gets back to being Pitt and not a hollowed out version of itself like we've seen the last 2 years, then they're very serviceable in the ACC. Then they are competitive. Then they are, frankly, a pain in the ass to go up against because they're just solid. But you can kind of draw a bit of a downward trend line ever since Kenny Pickett walked out the door.
Sure.
And that's what I'm worried about. What they need to prove, I think, this season is that they can reverse that trend. They can reverse that trend. They can get back to being what they have been and what has made, I think, Pat Narduzzi a very successful college football coach. And that is finding those guys. That is building from the inside out. That is just being that pain in the ass, that team that is very, very solid.
Right.
Not always going to win 10 games, but certainly the kind of team that can knock you off, that puts the fear of God into you and is competitive week in and week out. And they just weren't that.
They were full on incompetent last year.
They were. They were.
And it's, again, I'm going to echo the wise Dan Rubenstein. Dude. Look, where is Pittsburgh geographically located? Like kind of a secretly ideal place, right? Pittsburgh is right on the border of, correct me if I'm wrong, Pittsburgh and Ohio. High school players. Western PA is a very quiet hotbed for quality football players. The whole state of Pennsylvania is. Ohio, absolutely. You can find Jordan Addison. You can find Izzy Abanikanda. You can find Brian O'Neill. You can find all these guys. It's proved to me, Pat Narduzzi, answer to me, Los Angeles Daily News, honorable mention doubles, proved to me the fire's still there.
Yeah.
I want to see those Duraflame logs in the office, Ty. Not a sponsor, could be. That's the prove it thing, right? Is the fire still with Pat Narduzzi to find and develop those guys? I hope so.
It kind of is an open question for me. It kind of is an open question because when guys start talking and expressing frustrations publicly in a manner that he has, I mean, look, we're all in favor of Pat Narduzzi, who gives approximately 0 Fs.
Yeah.
I love this version of this coach at this time. We need a guy who's a counterbalance to all of, what I think the networks are trying to sell us.
Yeah.
It's not all peaches and dreams, but is he still in this to win it? Like, what is the state of Pat Narduzzi right now?
I'll bet Pat Narduzzi's great in a hotel bar.
Ah, hell yeah.
Hell
yeah.
He'll never be on game day.
No.
But I kind of hope he is.
He'd be great.
Yeah.
He'd be great. Let's round out the ACC. What's Florida State need to prove to you this year?
Now it's like Florida State ascends to that playoff caliber level, and certainly a 12-team playoff caliber level. Now it's the sustaining. Now it's the not have a gap year. Now it's not dipping with no Jared Verse, Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, Trey Benson, certainly Jordan Travis, right? A lot of star power is gone. And like, I look at the start of their schedule. I think it's the first 5 or 6 games. Again, pull it up whenever you'd like.
Sure.
Florida State should absolutely make DJU and fool America into thinking DJU is Heisman-ish through the first month and a half of the year.
Boston College, Memphis, Cal, SMU, and then Clemson to start off.
Yeah, so pre-Clemson.
The month of October. Yeah.
DJU
and Georgia
should be,
Tech. Georgia Tech in week 0, excuse me.
Right, and Georgia Tech I think will be feisty and interesting this year. But DJU's been in college a long time.
Yeah.
Receivers going to look very new. It's Malik Benson coming over from Alabama. The star power isn't there at receiver, at least the obvious returning star power isn't there. But he should be so good And it's what, Roydell, Williams, Lawrence Toafili's still there in the backfield, whatever. I'm just naming names at this point, but like they should be annihilating teams that first month of the year. You need to prove that you're just not skipping a beat with a bunch of new names.
I don't know what they need to prove, frankly. I think when I thought about Florida State within the construct of our little game here, the thing that I kept coming back to was proving it without Jordan Travis. And I say that because Jordan Travis had been there. He was in on the ground floor when Mike Norvell came over. And for a long time was overlooked as a guy who could be the starting quarterback and get results, grew into that role. I think improved over the time that he was in Tallahassee, but moreover was a really important glue guy for that team. You know, kind of represented the culture that Norvell was trying to build and had been through it with Norvell on this pathway to becoming a conference championship caliber team, a playoff caliber team. And so to have him have that experience, frankly, a lot of experience leaving, we saw what that version of Florida State looked like in the bowl game against Georgia. That's not an easy task for Norvell to have to rebuild. Now, I don't have any indications that he can't rebuild because recruiting has been strong. He is one of those. He is one of those guys that I hold up as a really good example of someone who knows how to balance high school with portal recruiting.
Sure.
Right. So what he maybe lacks on one side of that equation, he makes up for with the other and vice versa. I think he's a really good coach. I think he's done a good job assembling talent in the short time he's been there. But how he does so now in 24 and beyond, knowing that there is so much leaving, I think will be a really big open question for me that I believe he will prove in due time, but would not surprise me if Florida State is not an 11-win team this season, even with this schedule. It's just, it might take a minute for them to get back to where they were.
Yeah, I think Florida State, though, the prove it to me, I think you alluded to with the recruiting. They finished number 10 high school class this past year. I think that's how 24/7 refers to it. But number 16 last year. Florida State should be in a position to be a huge beneficiary of no Nick Saban.
Yeah, well, that's
Mario
true.
Cristobal, an excellent recruiter, but also he's not really going to attract, to your point, the best of the best quarterback-wise. Florida's in a very strange place, obviously, right now, to be kind to the situation in Gainesville. Like, it should be a lap situation where Florida State should be able to take advantage and become the number 7 class, 6 class, somewhere in there. Maybe not the heights of to where Jimbo had them in the recruiting class conversation, but they should be a vacuum team right now with how some of, Clemson recruiting has fallen off a little bit. Like, there has been a power shift right now in the Southeast, and prove to me, Florida State, that not only can you stick the landing, but you're putting in those hours, figuring out your twists and flips and everything like that off the high board, off the high platform. So that to me is sort of an off-field prove it.
Let's talk about Florida, actually. Bring up the Gators. Did you look at Florida's schedule at all?
It's not, if they don't start the season 6-1,
they're toast.
They're absolute toast.
They're toast. So we talk about the December to remember often.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a November to remember for Florida football. These are the teams that they play in the month of November. You ready?
Yeah.
Georgia at Texas, home against LSU, home against Ole Miss, at Florida State to close out the season. On top of that, which is just in the month of November.
Yeah.
They also have the aforementioned Miami Hurricanes week 1. They've got A&M in week 3. They've got Tennessee and Kentucky in the middle of October. So Florida and Billy Napier obviously getting the short end of the stick with this SEC schedule. This is a murderer's row that they're going to have to contend with later in the year. Frankly, I don't know what they need to prove. I mean, they need to prove that they can win with the talent on hand. They need to prove they get a good quarterback in there and get the most out of them.
Well, it's Graham Mertz. Yeah,
I know. Billy Napier needs to prove that he's got this program going in a good direction, much to the point that I made earlier with Deion Sanders at Colorado, proving that you can build that momentum that tends to lead you down a more fruitful path. I just don't see how you do it with the schedule. I don't want to write them off. It's only March, but man, I'm looking at this. This is a brutal schedule. All of these teams here in the month of November, maybe with the exception of Florida State. I don't know what that's going to look like because there is a fair amount of attrition there. But I mean, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss right now with what I'm looking at, those all look like losses to me. There's very little wiggle room for Billy Napier, I think, to stay on in 25.
And they open with Miami, but that's at home in Gainesville, so it's Cam Ward in the swamp for the first time. That could be very tricky. That could be a nice advantage, more experience for Graham Mertz in that kind of venue. Yeah, I mean, you look specifically at what Florida lacked last year defensively, whatever. They just got to tackle people, right? They just have to tackle people. You got to prove that you can tackle people on offense. You got to prove that you can find somebody and develop somebody to take the top off of a defense. Ricky Pearsall was really good. He's gone. And I'm going to get a little crass here, Ty, but you look at how they finished the year last year. You look at how they're going to have to finish the year this year, and you look at specifically the Arkansas and Mizzou games last year. They're going to need to be the Peter North team of the year. We're going to need a lot better, stronger, and more robust finishes from Florida. Sorry. I gave you a warning, right? Yeah. I gave you the crass warning, but
don't Google that. Don't Google that.
You don't have to Google that, or Google that on your own time, not on your family's time. That the effort at the end of the Arkansas game, the position to just get a stop, and I think they were one of the worst teams at getting off the field last year against Mizzou when Harrison Mevis, the kicker for Mizzou, chomping at the end of that. They drive 60 or so yards to get into field goal position to win that game at the gun. They just prove that you can be locked in, prove that you can be bought in, prove that, and it's a similar thing with Miami, that you're there every second of the game to win. And you got to do it quickly, again, because you got to start 6-1. You just have to against the schedule.
They have a lot to, Napier's got a lot to prove.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really hard to prove it against that schedule.
Yeah.
It's going to be really hard. Let's stay in the SEC.
Please.
Let's go on the other side of the SEC now. Oklahoma.
Fascinating team.
Oklahoma needs to prove that the move to the SEC wasn't a mistake. Okay? It needs to prove it. On the field, they need to prove it. Clearly, the business end of the conversation is a different thing. That's self-explanatory. They're getting more money. We understand all that. But there is a very, very good chance that Oklahoma is going to play at least 5 top 10 teams this year. They've got Texas, Red River Shootout. They've got Ole Miss, Mizzou, Alabama, LSU. That's in addition to Tennessee and Auburn.
Yeah.
That is an absolute murderer's row. It is not a Big 12 schedule. That is a big boy SEC
Don't
schedule.
They have
if I've ever seen one.
Do they not have the flagship University of Maine on the schedule as well?
They do.
The Black Bears?
Okay. They do have the Black Bears, the very ferocious Black Bear mascot.
Yeah. Another team that the back half of the schedule specifically, right? Yeah.
Oklahoma, not Maine. Yeah. Brutal. And so I just think, because I know there has been this narrative out there that opposing fan bases have had a lot of fun with, frankly, I know that there is going to be added focus on whether or not Oklahoma looks competitive in these games and looks like they belong on the same field as SEC counterparts.
Yeah.
It may take them a little bit to kind of acclimate to that culture, acclimate to that competitive environment, because it's not the Big 12. It is going to be more difficult. The schedule is extremely challenging. They've got a new quarterback now in Jackson Arnold, who I think looked good in limited action.
Turnover prone in that bowl game, but it's a bowl game. It's a bowl game.
A bowl game, but I think there's a lot to like about Jackson Arnold, and certainly a lot to like about Brent Venables making the defense better, still recruiting at a very high level. I don't have a reason to think that Oklahoma is going to go out there and get blown off the field. I don't believe that's going to be the case, but this is definitely a step up in terms of competition. And so there's a lot to prove on the Venables side of this, to prove that you can do what needs to be done to win with this being your competition.
I think
just different.
I think there's a lot to prove from Seth Luttrell. Hasn't called an offense in quite some time, in about a decade. You go back to, I think it was 2015, a great North Carolina offense. So that's Marquise Williams and Elijah Hood, I believe, if I'm getting my years correct here. And they were pretty close to winning the ACC. in that close game against Clemson. So he hasn't called an offense in quite some time. Obviously, the connection, and he was there last year, I believe, as an analyst. Yep. But that's an open question to me when you have a new full-time coordinator, that you have a quarterback that you were willing to like part with your all Big 12 quarterback, first. I think he was unanimous, Dylan Gabriel, unanimous all Big 12 first team quarterback last year, that like a lot is being put on Jackson Arnold with what's looking like a rebuilt offensive line, looking like not a ton of star power at receiver. There's a lot to prove to me from Jackson Arnold that he's so good that it was worth and is worth what that roster is going to look like. And that, not to mention, they make the change at defensive coordinator, and I think they're going to continue to improve there. But man, that schedule.
It's tough. It's really tough. This
is year 3. This is the prove it year for every coach in year 3.
It's a prove it year for everybody in year 3. It is a great time among many reasons. Let's say I'm not high on Oklahoma State, but if you're an Oklahoma State fan rooting against your rival, these are high times in a sense.
Sure.
Because Oklahoma is going to have to go through it this year, and would not surprise me if there are multiple losses more than they're used to.
Yeah, I agree. That's okay.
Okay. Should we finish up? We got 5 more teams here.
Yeah.
Let's finish them out.
Let's do it.
And let's stick in the SEC.
I'm ready.
Talk about LSU. What's LSU have to prove?
Defense. Garrett Nussmeier has to throw it to consistently players wearing purple and gold. I think that's a prove it thing, that he's finally having his opportunity. He's finally getting to relish the opportunity to have a premium job in the sport, and recruiting at receiver has been there. Offensive line has improved over the past couple of years, but it's to prevent the sloppiness. It is fix everything that fell out into quicksand last year with this team, and prove that, again, this is another Nick Saban vacuum team, that even though Brian Kelly beat Alabama in year 1, you have so much good momentum in terms of star power with Harold Perkins emerging. Obviously, Jaden Daniels might be the 2nd overall pick in this year's NFL draft. Yep. So many good things emerging from the early goings on with Brian Kelly, but defensive recruiting, defensive development around Harold Perkins, like, it is an emergency situation. LSU should never have anything less than a pretty good defense, and it was very much less than. It was horrible. Not a take at all last year. No. So that's the prove it element, that like there is a huge open window for LSU's ascendance this year, and Brian Kelly needs to prove that he can sort of fix everything. Obviously making a change at defensive coordinator, but there's a lot of good offensive players on this schedule for
There's
LSU.
a lot. There's a lot. I think this is the year where Brian Kelly proves that he's worth the investment.
Okay.
Frankly, because part of his allure coming down from Notre Dame, before Notre Dame, every other stop he had been, it's been noted that he's a very good CEO type, quote unquote CEO coach. What does that mean? Well, successful coaches, at least ones with longevity, are used to taking all of these changes in stride. Look at Nick Saban, had staff turnover every single season. BK has not had to deal with it quite on that level, but he's mostly been very, very good at adapting on the fly, hiring guys, making changes as needed, incrementally getting better over the course of his stay. Job 1 this offseason, you mentioned it, fix the defense. So they get rid of Matt House. They bring down Blake Baker from Mizzou, young guy, 41, bit of a splash hire.
Yeah. Paid him a ton of money.
Poaching him away from Mizzou, a great move. Promoted Joe Sloan from within to offensive coordinator after Mike Denbrock left to go back up to Notre Dame. What we have not seen BK do is prove that he can be an effective CEO, prove that he can absorb those kinds of staff changes and that need to adapt while in the SEC. I feel like he's proven it everywhere else.
Yeah.
But proving it on this level in the SEC as the conference gets harder, as your Heisman Trophy winning quarterback leaves, and as you're changing a lot around the program, proving it on this level, I think, is something that we have not seen from him. I have every reason to believe that he can and will do it, because there is a lot of talent there, and I believe he's a good coach. I believe he is worth that investment.
I agree.
And certainly the guys that he is plugging in, Blake Baker, Joe Sloan's a big time up and comer in the college ranks. Certainly he's got enough ammo there to do it, but we need to see it.
Schedule's spaced out pretty nicely, by the way.
Schedule's okay. Yeah, you can make some hay with the schedule if you're BK, but there's a lot that needs to be resolved, and not the least of which is moving Harold Perkins back to his rightful position, which he did not do last year.
I think he's back at middle linebacker. I think
that's what I'm saying.
Well, I think, what is his natural position is the question. Like, he was kind of an edge rusher spy his freshman year, and then he was moved off of the line of scrimmage last year, and that was like caused an uproar, and they've kind of said he's staying there.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think they realize, and I've listened to plenty of comments from BK in the offseason, they recognize that one of their big things that they need to resolve on the defensive side of the ball is putting Harold Perkins in the position where he can actually make an impact.
Okay, I agree.
So they know that, and they need to put him in those spots this coming season. They need to prove that they can do that too.
What's Ari's favorite term? They need to prove that defense can stop playing grab ass. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a way to summarize.
We've got Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Utah left here. Longer show than usual, but I feel like we're really getting to the nitty gritty of it here in the offseason.
Good. So you want to go Nebraska?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Block
Nebraska.
somebody.
Block somebody. That's a big one.
Block 4 Dylan Raiola. Make his career worthwhile. Protect him at all costs.
They need to prove that there is a vision that they can execute on. They need to prove that the vision is not just limited to Dylan Raiola and Matt Rhule, his Emojipedia on social media. Like, they need to prove that it's got more teeth than that. Year one was bad, still not as bad as it could have been or as we thought it might be. 5-7 is okay. 5-7, it was not pretty, and it was mostly because of their defense and the Big Ten West schedule, which never hurts. The schedule is much harder this year, though. I don't want to say it's bowl or bust for Matt Rhule in Nebraska. I don't believe that's the case quite yet. But Matt Rhule has been able to cultivate an optimism around this program, or at least around the future version of this program, that I think Nebraska fans, at least the ones that we've talked to, are still very keen on. There is an expiration date, though, on enthusiasm in college football, as you know. There's an expiration date. And so starting a true freshman in Dylan Raiola, which appears like it will be the case, that will buy you some time. They brought over guys via the transfer portal last year that didn't play much along the line that we certainly need to see out there and being productive this year to feel better about that future state of this program. I just think it's probably not going to happen this year, but we need to see some continued improvement to kind of warrant all of this enthusiasm around that program. Because there's a lot of it. There's more now than there's been in a long time. We need to see something for that emotional investment, if that makes sense.
I agree. I think Matt Rhule just needs to prove he knows what he's doing, because the biggest issue with this Nebraska team came on offense, and you bring in the coordinator they bring in, you bring in the quarterback transfer they bring in last year. You're like, I'm not positive he knows what he's doing in terms of a vision on offense. The offensive line was a mess last year. I don't think they seem to focus on skill in the portal, and I know it's harder to focus on like top tier offensive linemen to improve things. So they bring in Oregon's third string running back. They bring in Texas's Wyoming transfer, Isaiah Nair, who was unfortunately beat up at Texas and was not, able to sort of prove it all that often on the field in Austin. But you're like, what has changed? Who is protecting? And they're beat up along the offensive line last year, but like, you're throwing a freshman into the mix behind a pretty suspect offensive line. And you're just like, are we just going for the Baylor formula, in which also, by the way, Charlie Brewer was running for his life, even though they were winning games? And so it's just like, Matt Rhule needs to prove he has a plan here. 8 years, $74 million, something like that. Yeah. It's a lot of money to not make bowl games. And Nebraska had been the beneficiary of being in the West. That's no longer going to be the case the way this conference is organized. So I hate to be like the big neck roll TV analyst, but like starts up front. If there's no offensive line, if the offensive line is merely below average, that's an improvement. I don't know how many games, like if Nebraska scores 25 points a game last year, I think they win a bunch of their games late, right?
Yeah.
And it's a fully 25. 25 is like the 80th best team in the country in points per game. So it's like if they're scoring 2.2 points per drive or something like that, it's a completely different year. But as small a number as that sounds, it seems to be a pretty big hurdle. So for me, Nebraska off the high platform, it's no back flops, no front flops, no flops at all. Stay off of YouTube compilations after you jump off. That's what it is to me.
Yeah, I think they only went over 20 points maybe 4 times last season. So clearly offense was a bit of an issue. They weren't great on special teams either, which is a separate conversation altogether. But defensively, per the SP Plus, a top 10 unit, number 8 defensively.
Yeah.
So listen, you stay solid on the defensive side of the ball. If you can build up, just get incrementally better on offense.
But they can't do everything. They just
can't. Do everything. Can't do everything.
Can't build the whole plane out of Tony White. Yeah.
Got to start somewhere. Okay, 3 more teams. Iowa.
I'm rooting for Iowa
rival
so
in the Heroes
hard.
game.
I'm rooting for Iowa so hard this year in a fully genuine, non-ironic way.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Again, within the framework of this game, I think the tendency is to say, well, Iowa needs to prove it can play offense.
Sure.
Iowa needs to prove it can get better on offense. That has never been Iowa's game, at least not under Kirk Ferentz.
Yeah.
He doesn't give a crap about offense. He never has. I think Iowa needs to prove, Kirk Ferentz needs to prove that he still has the juice. You know, like we talked about it with Pat Narduzzi.
Yeah.
I think we need to see this from Kirk Ferentz because they ran his kid out. I don't know what kind of effect, if any, it had on him, but I'm sure that wasn't an easy pill to swallow.
Yeah.
This season, the schedule is very much not a murderer's row. It will be harder. It will be harder. I think they can again benefit from a very sound defense.
Yeah.
You just assume as much as fact with Iowa. They're going to have that. There are plenty of teams on this schedule, Dan, that frankly will not be able to deal with even a reduced version of Iowa's defense. You can play defense first football against this schedule in 2024 and still be fine if you're Iowa. But here's the caveat. If you look a little bit into the future, there's a really good chance that the schedule we see in 2024 only continues to get harder from here on out. Right? So look at who they're playing. You can pull it up if you want.
Mm-hmm. I have it in front of me.
Look at who they're playing, and you could, I think, very easily make a case like, okay, this is a step up from where it was a year ago. This is a bit of a harder schedule. A lot of the teams from last season that they're playing again this year, most of them should be improving in some way, shape, or form. But it's still not a murderer's row. But project forward into 25, into 26. Some of that stuff's available now where you can figure out where things are going to go next. It becomes readily apparent to me the half-team approach that they have taken from this point forward only means diminishing returns. So they might get away with it to some extent this year. But beyond 24, moving forward in this new world order where the Big Ten has, 55 teams, whatever the hell it is.
Yeah.
It becomes harder and harder and harder to play that brand of football. So Kirk Ferentz needs to prove that, first off, he's got the juice, that it's not going to be a Narduzzi
Has
situation.
Kirk Ferentz ever had what we could consider to be
Well,
juice?
Probably not.
Okay.
But he needs to prove some degree of adaptability, that he can handle what I think is coming as the schedule continues to get a little bit harder down the stretch.
I could not disagree with you more.
Okay. Why?
I could not, in good conscience, disagree with you more.
Why? Tell me why.
In what world does Kirk Ferentz evolve? In what world can you sit here on this beautiful program that we've cultivated over many years and say, the time is now for Kirk Ferentz to evolve? And
doesn't he have to?
No!
The situation around him is changing.
So
the
what?
Schedule. The schedule is changing.
Who
The
cares?
rules are changing. They're putting a 2-minute warning in now.
Who cares?
Dan. All of these things are changing. Kirk Ferentz
Look,
does not exist in a time bubble.
Here's the reality, Ty. How many points did they score against ranked teams last year?
Like 5.
No,
I don't know.
0. 0 points. They got shut out by Michigan, Tennessee, and Penn State. They lost 92-0 to those 3 teams. They ended up in the Big Ten championship game. They ended up with one of the best defenses in the country, with one of the best defensive players in the country before he got hurt, Cooper DeJean. And they won their way. They lost, I think, they lost one their way as well. Was it Minnesota? Who'd they lose to 15-10? I always remember that score last year. Iowa. I think it was Minnesota, wasn't it?
Last season lost 15-10 to
Come on, Ty.
last season it lost 12-10 to Minnesota.
12-10 Minnesota. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a blowout baseball loss, but not a great football score.
Right.
They need to prove that they can just keep doing this. In a world, right? People are desperate to win this many games. I hate it. I hate watching it. I don't love it ironically, but say what you will, their sort of weird nihilistic take on college football. Keep doing it. Who am I to question it? It's an awful experience if you're an Iowa fan. It's an awful experience if you're a fan of anybody else. But at a certain point, Ty, we are who we are. And so as long as Kirk Ferentz is the head coach of that team, this is what we're going to get. And so they need to prove that they can continue to adapt to their opponents defensively, and then there's offense, right? And if Caden McNamara, I mean, he's had 2 major surgeries these past 2 years. If he works out, if some transfers work out, I mean, Luke Lachey hurt himself at basically the start of last year after a promising start. Like, sure, maybe he's the next whoever, Sam Laporta. But they just need to prove that they can be the next version of Iowa football. That's it.
It's a little bit of a social experiment, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a little bit of a science experiment and social experiment.
Yeah.
To see what happens if you try to run the same system over and over again with changing dynamics around you. And so for that reason, I'm with you. I
was commuting to work in a surplus Russian era tank, right? It doesn't make sense. It's kind of scary if you're also on the road with them. If you find yourself on the Autobahn with Penn State or Ohio State or Michigan or something, they're going to smoke you. But otherwise, this is what they need to prove, that this model is sustainable. No matter what Ty Hildenbrandt in beautiful Eastern PA has to say.
It's not sustainable. It is not sustainable.
But we say that before every year.
0 points. 0 points against ranked teams. 92-0.
The check's
clear. It is not sustainable.
Ty, the check's clear. The Big Ten TV check's clear. The bowl check's clear. You score 0 points against Tennessee in whatever bowl that was, with the Citrus Bowl, whatever it was. Check's clear. The check's clear. And
these games just weren't even close against some of these better teams.
Why sort of delude ourselves into saying that Kirk Ferentz needs to evolve when he is a finished product? That's it. This is it.
Perfectly evolved over millions of years like a great white shark.
Yes.
Kirk Ferentz.
He's the perfect killing machine. He kills the entertainment value of this sport for everybody but him. That's it. That's what he needs to prove. He and Phil Parker. And they're like Thelma and Louise convertible going off the side of the entertainment cliff.
Wisconsin.
Yeah. They're another team that just needs to score 25 points a game. TVD needs to prove that he can throw it to players exclusively wearing red and white. I think their schedule's pretty great, I believe, as well, especially their schedule's pretty great in terms of entertainment. They have a ton of tough teams on this. Don't they have Alabama and USC early?
That's right.
Well, Alabama early anyway. Yeah, they need to prove pop because I think they're well coached. I think it was super smart of them last year. They did a good job on defense by and large and preventing big plays, which I think is a great first step. But yeah, it's offensive pop. That's all it is with Wisconsin right now. And I appreciate the swing with TVD. They're going to need to prove that it was a place thing for TVD and not a TVD thing. That Wisconsin's a place where players seem to thrive, coaches seem to thrive, I guess until they don't, but like it's a winning place by and large. And so they need to prove that the magic aura, the dairy aura of Madison, Wisconsin is that like...
Sorry, did you just say dairy aura?
I did. I'm glad you caught that. Thank you for riding with me here. That like
it
is some like college football winning lagoon that TVD can bathe in the waters of Lake Mendota and thrive in Madison. That's what they need to prove, that sometimes you just need to have that successful place to get somebody's head right. That's what they need to prove.
TVD milking the success udder is what I got out of that.
Sure.
Okay. Finally, Utah. Let's talk about the Utes.
Yeah.
Cam Rising needs to prove that he's worth the wait.
Yep. Agree.
And it's not going to be easy. He's been away from football for a year, had pretty significant injury. It's not easy to come back. He's in year 6 now, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So stepping back into it and playing at a high level, he's going to have to prove that. So that's the first thing. Beyond that, though, I feel like Utah can continue being the same team Utah has been for the duration, for most of the time that Kyle Whittingham's been at Utah. Let's just say like the last 5 years, right?
Yeah.
If Utah stays that team going into this new conference, are they not the best team in the conference already? Are they not the odds-on favorite to win that conference if Utah just remains Utah?
Sure. I mean, that's yet to be seen. It's, I think, a question. I think you're right to bring it up. That like if stability is the secret sauce and Utah is one of the more stable programs in the nation, this is absolutely a prove it year for the case of stability being that secret sauce. And it's Cam Rising and Micah Bernard in the backfield. They lose key dudes in the secondary, but like you look at this proposed depth chart and it's like redshirt senior, redshirt senior, redshirt senior, redshirt junior, redshirt junior, like guys stick around and they're thoughtful about the transfers. And so the prove it thing is that this model travels. And whether you're playing Oregon, Washington, USC, whoever, or Oklahoma State, UCF, TCU, it doesn't matter because it's at a certain point, it's death taxes Kyle Whittingham winning 9 games. And so it's whether that can sort of float throughout the sport and in a new conference. That's all.
I don't think they have much to prove. I think what they have to prove is that they can hold serve in this big money era of college football.
Yeah.
It's more of a broader question for Utah than I think it is for some of the other schools that we've discussed here today, which is, we're talking LSU. Can they fix their defense? We're talking Florida and this murderer's row of a schedule. We're talking about Miami and can they get the most out of Cam Ward? But Utah, for me, it's almost more of an existential question. I mean, they're fine now. They're in the Power 4. They're in the Big 12.
Yeah.
I think they're in a really good position from a talent standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, stability, secret sauce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the dynamics around college football have changed pretty quickly. And it does tend to favor the programs that have the most money and can cash the biggest checks when it comes to NIL. And I don't know what Utah's place is in all of that. They can certainly build some momentum with a successful campaign in year 1 in the Big 12.
They're also kind of in an interesting geographic place that they can prove that they can sort of shift their recruiting footprint as needed, because it's not Cal going to the ACC. It's not even USC or Oregon going to the Big Ten, where they're playing a bunch of teams in a fully different region, thousands of miles away, where Utah, like the travel isn't going to be terrible for the most part. They'll have Texas teams, Oklahoma State, like the Kansas schools. Like, I feel like there's a lot of cultural overlap potentially. And
there's a lot of cultural overlap. I mean, the Salt Lake City area as a whole is growing very quickly. One of the fastest growing.
People can fly into Salt Lake from the Midwest or the Plains region. Yeah.
So it's not in a bad place at all. It is in a desirable location. It is turning on and opening up all the spigots.
Yeah.
getting the most you can out of, you know, the NIL front.
Sure.
Finding a way to recruit at perhaps a higher level than you have before. But in the immediate future, outside of the Cam Rising thing now in year 6, I don't know if there's a whole lot, at least from my perspective, that Utah needs to prove.
No, I mean, they're sort of, I'm glad we buttress them with Iowa in that, like, it's a stability thing. It's that, like,
no.
The only thing they need to prove is that they can keep proving. And that's kind of fascinating as their slate completely changes.
So look, longer show than usual.
Great.
Almost an hour and a half, Dan. But we had a lot to say here.
What happened there? That was total disaster. What is happening?
A lot to discuss here on this episode.
Yeah.
Hopefully we covered enough ground for the Verballerhood. Write in solidverbal@gmail.com or anywhere out on social media. Let us know what we got right. Let us know what we got wrong. Let us know if there are more teams that we should do. This was actually a fun thought experiment for you and I to go through, because we put this list together before we hit record today and gave ourselves a couple hours to think about each of these teams. And
find me another podcast that drops JD Roth and Peter North's name completely seamlessly in the flow of conversation.
I know. It's our secret gift.
Here's my closing question for you before we let the people go. Is there a threshold somewhere in terms of Patreon subscribers at verballers.com who support and keep this show alive? Is there a threshold
where are we going
on YouTube that you will agree to jump off of a 10-meter platform, 32 feet above a pool?
Oh, my God. Yeah. I mean,
give me a threshold. Is it Patreon? 2,000? 3,000?
I would, if we got to 2,000, I'd do it. Yeah. We'd have to find the platform.
Well, we can find you a 10-meter platform. We don't live in Siberia.
We'll keep it realistic. We get to 2, I would.
Really?
I would do it. Yeah.
My throat is closing thinking about the prospect of me jumping off of a 10-meter platform.
I feel like I could probably really hurt myself doing this.
That's not the fear to me. It's not the entry into the water. It's the bottoms of my feet, my heels would be drenched with sweat, taking each successive step onto the platform.
Really? At long last, I found something that makes you uncomfortable.
Go look up like a POV of an Olympic 10-meter platform, like somebody wearing a GoPro up the ladder and looking down onto the pool. It is not okay. So 2,000 people. Okay.
I would do it for 2.
And we can film.
Yeah, I'll do it for 2.
We can film it. All right.
I'll do it for 2.
I will. Yeah, I'll fly to Pennsylvania, or I'll fly you out here, or whatever. I mean, you have colleges around there. I have colleges around here. We can find it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I'm tensing up right now thinking about even watching you do it.
I mean, I'm not crazy about it, but for 2, I'll do it for 2.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. There's verballers.com.
Verballers.com. There you go. Yeah. Check it out. Ad-free episodes, bonus content, Discord, all of our off-season games that we're working on. That's that sort of thing. Yeah. Great show. Had a good time talking through all of these scenarios with you. For Ballerhood, reach out. Let us know what we got right and wrong. We will be back next week talking, more things, college football. Follow us on social media to play along at home. For that guy over there, my good friend, Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrandt, thanks again for downloading, for listening, supporting what we do. We'll talk to you all soon. Stay solid.
Peace.